morning air on Nexus Station carried the recycled breath of 1,000 worlds, each exhale telling stories of distant suns and alien dreams. Captain Elena Vasquez walked through the diplomatic quarter with measured steps, her worn leather boots clicking against the polished chrome floors that reflected the endless dance of beings from across the galaxy. She had been to more worlds than most people could name, fought battles that would never make it into official records, and negotiated truces with species whose very existence challenged everything humanity thought they knew about life itself. But today was supposed to be simple. A routine cultural exchange, a gesture of goodwill between the newly inducted human territories and the ancient powers that ruled the galactic core. Elena adjusted her navy blue diplomatic jacket, checking that her translator was properly calibrated and her credentials were in order. The weight of her service pistol against her hip was a comfort she rarely acknowledged, but always appreciated. Ambassador Thexmore awaited her at the entrance to the Grand Museum of the Eternal Dominion, his crystalline form catching and fracturing the artificial sunlight that filtered through the station's transparent aluminum dome. The Veltar were an old race, their bodies evolved from silicon-based organisms that had learned to shape themselves like living gems. When they moved, they sang in frequencies that made human teeth ache. "Captain Vasquez," Thexmore chimed, his voice harmonizing with itself in ways that the translator struggled to convey. "Your punctuality honors us. The Council is eager to share the treasures of our collective heritage with humanity." Elena nodded respectfully. Behind Thexmore stood representatives from a dozen other species, the towering Bracklet with their 6 arms and compound eyes that never seemed to blink, the ethereal whisperfolk whose bodies phased in and out of visible spectrum like ghosts made of starlight, and the mechanically augmented Corvex, whose cybernetic implants had long ago replaced most of their organic components. Each represented civilizations that had mastered faster-than-light travel while humans were still discovering fire. "The honor is mine, Ambassador," Elena replied, falling into step beside the alien delegation. "I understand the museum houses artifacts from the founding races of the Galactic Council." "Indeed," Thexmore confirmed, leading them through massive doors that were themselves carved from what appeared to be a single piece of black stone. "Some of these relics predate your species by millions of years. Today's tour will focus on the Hall of Dominion, where we display artifacts from the greatest empires in galactic history." The museum's interior was a testament to the artistic sensibilities of a dozen different species. Gravity fields allowed for exhibits that floated in impossible configurations, while temporal stasis fields preserved moments of ancient history in crystalline suspension. Eleanor found herself walking past the preserved death cry of a star, captured in a sphere of pure energy, and the final painting of an artist whose species had gone extinct before Earth's sun was born. "Remarkable," Elena murmured, genuinely impressed despite herself. As a military officer, she was trained to assess threats and weaknesses, but even her tactical mind had to appreciate the sheer scope of what she was seeing. "How many civilizations are represented here?" "Approximately 4,000, replied Corvex General Zixbeath, his mechanical voice carrying none of the warmth that his organic ancestors might have possessed. "These are merely the species that achieved what your people would call galactic significance, before joining the Council or being absorbed by it." There was something in the way he said absorbed that made Elena's hand unconsciously drift toward her sidearm. But before she could analyze the comment further, they arrived at the Hall of Dominion. The chamber was massive, its ceiling lost in shadows that seemed to move independent of any light source. Display cases lined the walls, each containing artifacts that radiated power even through their protective barriers. Elena could see weapons that hummed with contained energy, crown jewels that bent light around themselves like miniature black holes, and scientific instruments whose purposes defied easy categorization. But it was the central display that drew everyone's attention. In the exact center of the hall, suspended in a column of soft blue light, hung a skull. But this was no ordinary bone structure. The skull was easily 3 times the size of a human head, its surface carved with intricate patterns that seemed to shift when viewed directly. Gemstones had been embedded in the eye sockets, each one containing swirling galaxies of light that pulsed in rhythm with something Elena couldn't identify. The jawbone was lined with teeth that looked more like crystallized lightning than conventional bone, and the entire artifact radiated an aura of absolute authority. "Behold," Thexmore announced with reverence that bordered on worship, "the skull of God Emperor Nethyazoth of the Zethkari Dominion." For 3,000 years, this relic ruled over a quarter of the galaxy. It is said that entire star systems would surrender at the mere sight of this crown jewel of their empire. Elena approached the display case, studying the artifact with professional interest. The Zethkari had been mentioned in her briefings as one of the lost dominions, ancient empires that had mysteriously vanished from galactic history, leaving behind only ruins and legends. She had expected something impressive, but the skull before her seemed to pulse with an energy that made her skin tingle. How did they control such a vast territory? Elena asked, circling the display to examine the skull from different angles. 3,000 years ago, faster-than-light communication was still theoretical for most species.
The Zethkari possessed what they called the voice of dominion, explained Dr.
Yithalan, a Brocklet scholar whose 6 arms gestured in complex patterns as she spoke. Through artifacts like this skull, their god emperors could project their will across infinite distances. Entire populations would kneel without resistance when exposed to their power. Elena nodded, making mental notes. The skull was undeniably impressive, but she found herself less awed than her companions seemed to expect. Perhaps it was her military training, or perhaps it was the simple fact that humanity had learned to be skeptical of claims of absolute power. After all, every empire fell eventually. It's certainly elaborate, Elena commented, leaning closer to examine the intricate carvings. Though I have to wonder about the practical applications. How do you govern a galactic empire when your primary tool of control is a single skull? Several of the alien dignitaries exchanged glances that Elena couldn't quite interpret. There was something almost nervous in their body language. Captain, Ambassador Thexmore chimed carefully, perhaps you misunderstand the nature of what you're observing. This is not merely a decorative artifact. The God Emperor's skull retains a portion of the power that once commanded star systems. Even in death, it serves as a reminder of the natural order of dominion. Eleanor was about to respond when something extraordinary happened. The skull moved. It was subtle at first, just a slight shift in the angle of the jaw, a barely perceptible rotation of the entire artifact within its suspension field. But as Elena continued to stare at it, the movement became unmistakable. The skull was slowly, deliberately inclining forward in what could only be described as a bow. The change in the room's atmosphere was immediate and electric. Every alien present suddenly went rigid, their various forms of breathing becoming rapid and shallow. Alarm systems throughout the museum began to wail, and the soft blue suspension field around the skull flickered unstably. Impossible, Dr. Yithalan whispered, her 6 arms trembling as she reached for some kind of scanning device. The readings are... This cannot be happening. Elena looked around at the panicking aliens, then back at the skull, which had now completed what was unmistakably a gesture of respect directed specifically at her. She felt no fear, only curiosity, and a growing sense that she was missing some crucial piece of information. What exactly is impossible about it? Elena asked calmly, her voice cutting through the chaos of alarms and frightened alien chatter. General Zixip's mechanical system sparked as he struggled to process what he was witnessing. The skull... It recognizes you. It's showing deference. But that should not be possible. The Zethkari God Emperors bowed to no one. Their artifacts were designed to demand submission, not offer it. Elena studied the skull more carefully, noting how the gemstone eyes seemed to track her movement. Has this ever happened before? Never, Thexmore confirmed, his crystalline form vibrating with anxiety. In the 3,000 years since the fall of the Safari Dominion, their artifacts have remained inert. Powerful, yes, but dormant. We have brought thousands of diplomats, scholars, and leaders through this hall. Never has any artifact shown recognition of any individual's presence. The skull's bow deepened slightly, and Elena could swear she heard something like a whisper emanating from the display case. Not words exactly, but something that bypassed her ears entirely and spoke directly to a part of her mind she hadn't known existed. Captain, Dr. Yithalan said urgently, her scanning equipment painting her 6 arms in rapid patterns of light. You need to step back. The energy readings around the artifact are increasing exponentially. If this continues, the containment field could fail. But Elena didn't step back. Instead, she moved closer, studying the skull with the same methodical attention she would give to any puzzle that required solving. Tell me about the Zethkari, she said, her eyes never leaving the artifact. What happened to them? How did an empire that controlled a quarter of the galaxy simply vanish? The aliens exchanged more nervous glances. Finally, Ambassador Thexmore spoke, his harmonic voice subdued. The records from that period are incomplete. What we know comes from archaeological evidence and scattered references in the archives of species that survived the transition. The Zethkari Dominion appears to have collapsed almost overnight, approximately 3,000 years ago. One day, they were the dominant force in the galactic core. The next, their worlds were empty and their fleets had vanished. No survivors? No refugees? No explanation? Elena pressed. None that our scholars have been able to verify, General Zixpith confirmed. Some theories suggest they were conquered by an unknown force. Others propose that they transcended physical existence entirely. But the most widely accepted explanation is that they simply left for where? Unknown. The current galactic order was established in the power vacuum they left behind. The council system, the trade routes, even many of our technological standards, all of it was built on the foundation of whatever the Zethkari abandoned. Elena absorbed this information while the skull continued its impossible display of reverence. Around them, museum security forces were arriving. Beings in powered armor carrying weapons that hummed with barely contained energy. But none of them seemed willing to approach the display case while the artifact was active. Captain Vasquez, Dr. Yethalan said, her voice tight with barely controlled panic. I'm reading energy signatures that match descriptions from the height of the Zethkari Dominion. If the skull fully activates, it could potentially influence the minds of everyone on this station. Please, you must step away. Elena finally turned to look directly at the panicking aliens surrounding her. And what if I don't want to step away? What if I want to know why this thing recognizes me? The question hung in the air like a challenge, and Elena realized that she had crossed some kind of invisible line. The alien dignitaries were no longer looking at her with the polite respect due to a representative of a newly inducted species. There was something else in their expressions now, something that looked suspiciously like fear. Captain, Texmore said carefully, perhaps this cultural exchange has provided enough excitement for one day. We could arrange for you to return to your quarters while our scholars investigate this unusual phenomenon. It was politely phrased, but Elena recognized a dismissal when she heard one. More importantly, she recognized the particular kind of dismissal that meant, we need to discuss what to do about you when you're not in the room. Of course, Elena replied smoothly. Though I admit, I'm curious about something. In your archives of ancient history, have you ever encountered references to species that the Zethkari might have considered equals or superiors? The silence that followed her question was deafening. Even the alarm seemed to quiet, as if the station itself was waiting for an answer. It was General Zixpith who finally spoke, his mechanical voice devoid of its earlier confidence. Captain Vasquez, in all our historical records spanning tens of thousands of years and documenting the rise and fall of countless civilizations, there has never been any evidence of a species that the Zethkari considered superior to themselves. They were, by all accounts, the apex predators of their era. Elena nodded thoughtfully, then looked back at the skull. It had maintained its bow throughout the entire conversation, the gemstone eyes never wavering from her face. Then, I suppose, she said quietly, we're about to learn something new about galactic history. As she turned to leave, Elena heard the skull whisper one more time, but this time, impossible as it seemed, she understood the words. Welcome home, daughter of the void. We have been waiting. The implications of that whisper would haunt every being in the room for the rest of their lives. But for Elena Vasquez, it was simply the first piece of a puzzle that would reshape everything the galaxy thought it knew about the natural order of power. Behind her, as she walked calmly toward the exit, the ancient artifact of the Zethkari god emperor maintained its bow until she was completely out of sight. Then and only then did it return to its original position, leaving a room full of terrified aliens to contemplate what they had just witnessed. In the depths of space, on worlds that had been empty for 3 millennia, ancient machines began to stir. Deep beneath the surface of forgotten planets, vast structures that had slumbered since the fall of the Dominion started their awakening sequences. And in the cold void between stars, ships that had been drifting dark and silent for 3,000 years began to turn their senses toward a small blue planet in an unremarkable spiral arm. Humanity's introduction to galactic politics had taken an unexpected turn, and Elena Vasquez found herself at the center of mysteries that would either elevate her species to unimaginable heights or destroy everything they had ever known. The game had begun, and none of the players yet understood the rules. 3 days after the incident at the Grand Museum, Elena Vasquez sat in her quarters aboard the human diplomatic ship Meridian, staring at a datapad that contained more questions than answers. The official report from the Galactic Council had been delivered with diplomatic efficiency. A minor technical malfunction in the museum's display systems had caused unusual energy fluctuations around one of the exhibits. The matter was being investigated by council technicians, and there was no cause for concern. Eleanor had written enough official reports to recognize a cover-up when she read one. Her personal quarters on the Meridian were spartanly furnished. A regulation bunk, a small desk, and a viewport that currently showed the swirling nebula that surrounded Nexus Station, but the walls were covered with printouts, digital displays, and handwritten notes that mapped out everything she had learned about the Zethari Dominion since her encounter with the skull. The information was frustratingly sparse. Despite claiming to possess archives spanning tens of thousands of years, the Galactic Council's records on the Zethakari were surprisingly limited. Official histories described them as a regrettably aggressive species that had expanded too rapidly for sustainable governance. Their collapse was attributed to internal instability and resource depletion. Standard explanations for standard imperial collapse. But Elena had spent enough time in military intelligence to recognize sanitized history when she encountered it. The Zethkari hadn't simply collapsed. They had been erased from the historical record with surgical precision. A soft chime from her door interrupted her research. "Come in," Elena called, not looking up from her work. To her surprise, it was Dr. Turner. Sarah Chen, the Meridian's chief xenobiologist. Sarah was one of the few humans on the diplomatic mission who had actually requested the assignment, driven by scientific curiosity rather than career advancement. Her enthusiasm for alien cultures was matched only by her complete inability to navigate political subtlety. "Elena," Sarah said, closing the door behind her and activating the room's privacy screen with practiced efficiency. "We need to talk, privately." Elena finally looked up, noting the tension in Sarah's posture and the way her fingers drummed against the datapad she carried. "What's on your mind, Doc?" Sarah moved to the viewport and stared out at the nebula for a moment before speaking. "I've been analyzing the sensor data from your museum visit, not the official readings. Those are being classified by Council security. I mean the biological monitors in your diplomatic escort suit." Elena raised an eyebrow. She had forgotten that all human personnel wore biomonitoring equipment during diplomatic functions. Standard safety protocol when dealing with alien technologies and environments. "And? Your neural activity during the skull incident was unlike anything in our medical databases," Sarah said, turning to face Elena directly. "Your brain patterns showed resonance frequencies that shouldn't be possible for human neurology. It was like watching someone suddenly develop perfect pitch for music they'd never heard before." Eleanor leaned back in her chair, processing this information. "Are you saying the skull was communicating with me on some kind of neurological level?" "I'm saying it was more than communication," Sarah replied, activating her datapad and projecting a holographic display into the air between them. "Look at these readings. Your brain activity synchronized with energy patterns emanating from the artifact. Not just receiving signals, actively harmonizing with them." "Eleanor, it was like watching two instruments tune themselves to play the same song." The holographic display showed Elena's neural patterns as wave-like formations in blue, overlaid with similar patterns in gold that Sarah identified as emissions from the skull. Where the patterns intersected, they created complex interference waves that seemed to pulse with their own rhythm. "This is fascinating," Elena admitted, studying the display. "But what does it mean practically? Why would a 3,000-year-old Zethkari artifact be able to interface with human neurology?" Sarah hesitated, then pulled up another display. "That's where things get really interesting. I've been comparing your neural patterns with every known example of human brain activity in our databases. Military personnel, scientists, artists, even cases of unusual neurological conditions." The new display showed dozens of neural pattern samples, creating a complex web of data that looked like abstract art. Elena's patterns were highlighted in red, and even to her untrained eye, it was obvious that they stood apart from every other example. "Your brain activity during the skull incident doesn't match any known human baseline," Sarah continued. "But when I started looking at historical data from our early space exploration programs, I found something interesting. A new set of patterns appeared on the display, these ones much older and less detailed. These are neural scans from the first human deep space explorers who reported contact with unknown phenomena during their missions. Officially, these incidents were attributed to isolation-induced hallucinations, but the neural patterns, Elena saw it immediately. The historical patterns, crude though they were, showed the same distinctive wave-like formations that had appeared during her encounter with the skull. "How many cases are we talking about?" Elena asked. "Over the past century, maybe a dozen documented incidents, always involving humans who had traveled beyond the local stellar group, always dismissed as stress-related psychological episodes." Sarah paused, then added quietly, always involving individuals who are subsequently transferred to non-exploration duties for their own well-being.
Elena felt a chill run down her spine that had nothing to do with the ship's environmental systems.
Sarah, are you suggesting that contact with Zethkari artifacts triggers some kind of dormant neurological capability in certain humans? I'm suggesting that maybe the contact doesn't trigger anything, Sarah replied. Maybe it reveals something that was already there. Before Elena could respond to this unsettling possibility, her communications terminal chimed with an incoming priority message. The sender's identification made both women freeze. Ambassador Thexmore of the Veltar delegation. Elena accepted the call, and Thexmore's crystalline form materialized as a hologram in the center of the room. His usual harmonious voice carried notes of barely controlled anxiety. Captain Vasquez, he began without preamble. I am contacting you at considerable personal risk to discuss the events at the Grand Museum. There are developments that you should be made aware of. Elena exchanged glances with Sarah, then gestured for the ambassador to continue. 3 hours after your departure from the museum, 7 additional Zethkari artifacts in our collection began exhibiting signs of activation. Thexmore continued. Weapons that have been dormant for millennia are now generating energy signatures. Navigation devices are pointing towards unknown coordinates. Most disturbing of all, a communication crystal has begun transmitting signals into deep space. Elena felt her tactical training kick in. What kind of signals? We do not know. The communication protocols are unlike anything in our databases. But Captain, the signals are being transmitted in the direction of what your people call the local group, specifically, toward coordinates that correspond to your home system. Sarah stepped forward, her scientific curiosity overriding diplomatic protocol. Ambassador, have you detected any responses to these transmissions? Thexmore's crystalline form flickered, a sign of extreme agitation in his species. Dr. Chen, we have detected responses from 17 different locations throughout the galaxy. Ancient sites that have been silent since the fall of the Zethkari Dominion are now broadcasting acknowledgement signals. It appears that Captain Vasquez's presence has awakened something that has been dormant for 3,000 years. Elena stood up, her mind racing through the implications. Ambassador, I appreciate you bringing this information to me personally, but I have to ask, why are you risking your position to tell me this? Thexmore was silent for a long moment before responding. Because, Captain Vasquez, I believe my people, all the Council species, have been living in a carefully constructed lie for the past 3 millennia, and I suspect that you represent the return of a truth that we have forgotten at our own peril. The holographic connection flickered, and Thexmore's image began to degrade. I cannot maintain this connection much longer without risking detection. But Captain, you should know that the Council has called an emergency session to discuss the human situation. Some members are advocating for immediate restrictions on human movement within Council space. Others are suggesting more permanent solutions. The transmission cut out, leaving Elena and Sarah alone with the weight of what they had just learned. Elena, Sarah said quietly, I think we need to consider the possibility that humanity's relationship with the galaxy is about to become very complicated. Elena moved to her viewport, staring out at the nebula while her mind processed the flood of new information. Ancient artifacts awakening at her presence, neural patterns that suggested some humans possessed dormant capabilities, historical evidence of previous contact incidents that had been systematically suppressed, and now, apparently, a galactic government that was considering humanity a potential threat. Sarah, she said finally, I want you to compile everything we know about human deep space exploration incidents, every case of unexplained phenomena contact, every transfer, every cover-up, every piece of data that our own government might have classified. That could take days to dig through, Sarah protested. Then we'd better get started, Elena replied. Because I have a feeling that understanding our own hidden history is going to be crucial to surviving whatever comes next. As if summoned by her words, Elena's personal terminal chimed with an incoming message marked with the highest priority encryption codes. The sender was Admiral Harrison, commander of the human colonial fleet and Elena's direct superior. Elena accepted the message and read it twice before the full implications sank in. Captain Vasquez. Report to secure communications immediately. Intelligence assets throughout Council space are reporting massive changes in alien behavior patterns following your museum visit. Several species are recalling their diplomatic missions from human space. Council military forces have begun repositioning near the Sol system perimeter. We need to know what happened on that station, and we need to know now. This is a potential Code 7 situation. Acknowledge receipt and comply immediately. Code 7. Elena hadn't heard that classification since her academy days, when it was mentioned only in theoretical discussions of first contact scenarios gone catastrophically wrong. It meant that humanity's survival as a free species was potentially at stake. Sarah, Elena said, her voice taking on the commanding tone she used in combat situations. Change of plans. I need that research completed in 6 hours, not 6 days. And I need you to run a detailed analysis of every human crew member aboard this ship. If some humans have dormant capabilities that respond to Zethkari technology, we need to know who else might be affected. Sarah nodded, her scientific excitement tempered by growing awareness of the situation's gravity. What are you going to do? Elena moved to her personal safe and began retrieving equipment she had hoped never to use during a diplomatic mission. Her military-grade scanner, her personal sidearm, and most importantly, a small quantum communication device that would allow her to contact human intelligence networks without going through official channels. I'm going to find out what really happened to the Zethkari Dominion, Elena replied. Because I'm starting to suspect that they didn't just disappear 3,000 years ago. I think they were removed. And if that's true, then whoever removed them is probably not going to be happy about their artifacts waking up for a human captain. As Elena prepared to dive deeper into a mystery that could reshape galactic politics, neither she nor Sarah noticed the subtle changes beginning to manifest throughout the ship. In the engineering section, Lieutenant Johnson paused in his routine maintenance as alien-manufactured components began resonating with frequencies that shouldn't exist. In the communications array, Ensign Martinez found herself able to understand fragments of encrypted council transmissions without the aid of translation software. And deep in the ship's computer core, quantum processors that had been manufactured using technology traded from the council began accessing data banks that no human programmer had ever created, retrieving information that had been hidden in the space between electronic impulses for reasons that were about to become terrifyingly clear. Humanity's first contact with galactic civilization had been carefully orchestrated to appear routine and peaceful, but Elena's encounter with the skull had torn away a veil that had hidden 3,000 years of deception. Now both species, human and alien alike, were about to discover truths that would challenge everything they believed about the nature of power, dominion, and the destiny of intelligent life in the galaxy. The investigation was just beginning, but Elena already suspected that the answers she found would prove that humanity had never been the newcomers to galactic politics that everyone believed them to be. They were the return of something far older and infinitely more dangerous. The secure communications chamber aboard the Meridian was a marvel of human paranoia and alien technology working in harmony. Quantum encryption fields surrounded electromagnetic dampeners, while psi-shields borrowed from Council technology prevented even telepathic species from eavesdropping. When Elena activated the chamber's full security protocols, she was as isolated from the universe as any human being could be, while still remaining conscious. Admiral Harrison's image materialized with the crisp resolution that only the most expensive military communication equipment could provide. Even through the quantum static, Elena could see the tension in his weathered features. Harrison had commanded human forces through 3 colonial wars and 2 first contact scenarios, but she had never seen him look genuinely worried before.
Captain, Harrison began without preamble, we have a situation that goes far beyond diplomatic complications. In the past 72 hours, we've detected massive energy signatures emanating from 17 different locations throughout the galaxy.
Beneficios. Beneficios give up. Beneficios.
Dead worlds that have been archaeologically insignificant for millennia are suddenly broadcasting signals that our best scientists can't decode. Elena settled into the communication chair, her mind already working through the tactical implications. Admiral, I believe those signals are connected to my encounter with the Zethkari skull, but I think there's more to this than just ancient artifacts waking up. Explain. Elena activated her personal data display, sharing the information Sarah had compiled about human neural patterns and historical contact incidents. Sir, we may have been operating under false assumptions about humanity's place in galactic history. There's evidence suggesting that some humans possess dormant neurological capabilities that respond to Zethkari technology. More concerning, there are indications that our own government has been aware of this for decades.
Harrison's expression darkened as he reviewed the data.
Captain, what you're showing me suggests systematic suppression of information by human intelligence agencies. That's a serious accusation. With respect, Admiral, it's about to become the least of our problems. Elena replied. I've been contacted by a council ambassador who believes the galactic government has been built on deliberate historical falsification. If he's right, then humanity isn't just stumbling into an ancient mystery. We're returning to a role we've played before. Before Harrison could respond, alarms began blaring throughout the Meridian. Elena's personal terminal displayed an emergency message from the ship's sensor array. Massive energy signatures detected approaching from the direction of the galactic core. Admiral, we have incoming, Elena began, but her words were cut off as the ship's gravity fluctuated and the lights dimmed to emergency levels. Captain, Harrison's image flickered as quantum interference invaded the communication channel. We're detecting the same phenomenon near Earth. Massive structures are materializing in deep space beyond Pluto's orbit. They're not attacking, but they're waiting. Eleanor felt a chill that had nothing to do with the ship's failing environmental systems. What kind of structures? Ships, Captain. Ships bigger than anything in the Council fleets. Ships that our xenoarchaeologists are telling me match descriptions from Zethkari historical fragments. The communication channel dissolved into static, leaving Elena alone in the chamber, as the Meridian's emergency system struggled to compensate for whatever was happening outside. She quickly gathered her equipment and made her way to the ship's command center, where she found Captain Morrison coordinating with a crew that looked barely controlled panic. Report, Elena demanded, falling into the tactical advisor position she had held during their transit to Council space. Morrison, a veteran of the outer colony conflicts, looked up from his command displays with the expression of a man watching his understanding of reality crumble. Elena, we've got 12 massive objects materializing in our local space. They're not using any propulsion technology our sensors can identify, and they're not responding to communication attempts. But here's the strange part. They're not targeting us. Elena moved to the main display, studying the sensor data. The objects were indeed massive, each one dwarfing the largest Council dreadnoughts. But their configuration was unlike any military vessel she had encountered. Instead of weapon arrays and armor plating, they seemed to be composed of flowing organic curves and impossible geometric patterns that hurt to look at directly. Captain Morrison, Elena said carefully, have any crew members reported unusual sensations since these objects appeared? Morrison nodded grimly. Half the crew is reporting headaches, and several people claim they can hear whispers in languages they don't recognize. Dr. Chen is in sick bay treating 3 cases of spontaneous neural sensitivity. Elena, what the hell is happening to us? Before Elena could answer, the ship's communication array activated on its own. Every screen throughout the vessel displayed the same image, a figure that was unmistakably human in basic structure, but wrong in ways that made Elena's tactical instincts scream warnings. The figure wore robes that seemed to be woven from space itself, and its face, while human in proportion, possessed eyes that held depths no human gaze should contain. When it spoke, its voice bypassed the ship's audio systems entirely, speaking directly into the minds of every crew member. Humans of the vessel Meridian, the figure said, its mental voice carrying harmonics that resonated with frequencies Elena recognized from her encounter with the skull. I am Keeper Vorthak of the Eternal Fleet. We have monitored your return to galactic awareness with great interest. Eleanor stepped forward, addressing the image directly. I'm Captain Elena Vasquez. Who are you and what do you mean by return to galactic awareness? The figure's impossible eyes focused on Elena with an intensity that made her feel as if her entire life history was being read like an open book. Ah, the Awakener. Your neural resonance with the God Emperor's skull has opened pathways that have been sealed for 3 millennia. You have questions, Captain Vasquez. We have answers. Elena felt every tactical instinct she possessed urging her to be cautious, but her curiosity was stronger. What happened to the Zethkari Dominion? Why did they disappear? Keeper Vorthak smiled, an expression that somehow conveyed both warmth and terrifying alien intelligence. They did not disappear, Captain. They evolved. 3,000 years ago, the Zethkari reached an evolutionary threshold that allowed them to transcend the limitations of physical existence. But transcendence requires sacrifice. They abandoned their empire to join something greater, the eternal fleet that guards the boundaries between dimensions. Captain Morrison stepped beside Elena, his military bearing intact despite the surreal nature of their situation. And what does any of this have to do with humanity?
Everything, Vorthak replied.
The Zethkari were not the first species to reach transcendence. They were guided by predecessors who had walked the same path millennia earlier, species that had mastered the harmony between consciousness and cosmic force. Species that your people would recognize as human.
Elena felt the universe shift around her as the implications of that statement settled in.
You're saying that humans, that our species has been in the galaxy before? Not your species as it exists today, Vorthak clarified.
But the genetic and neurological patterns that define humanity are far older than your current civilization believes. 3 million years ago, the first human empire spanned the galaxy. They seeded countless worlds with life, established the fundamental structures of what you now call the Council system, and ultimately chose transcendence when their physical evolution had reached its limits. The command center fell silent as every crew member struggled to process what they were hearing. Elena found herself thinking of the neural patterns Sarah had shown her, the way her brain had synchronized with Zethkari technology, the historical suppression of contact incidents. "The Council knows," Elena said, the pieces finally clicking into place. "They know about humanity's previous presence in the galaxy. That's why they've been carefully managing our introduction to galactic politics. They're afraid we'll remember." Vorthak nodded approvingly. The current Council species are descended from civilizations that arose after the first human empire chose transcendence. They have built their entire social and political structure on the assumption that they represent the apex of galactic evolution. The return of humanity, even in its current diminished form, represents an existential threat to that assumption. Captain Morrison looked between Elena and the alien figure. "But why now? Why are you revealing this to us?" "Because," Vorthak replied, "the galaxy is approaching another evolutionary threshold. Forces that predate even the first human empire are stirring in the void between galaxies. The current Council species lack the neurological flexibility to adapt to what is coming. They will either evolve or be consumed. Humanity represents the only hope for guided transcendence rather than chaotic destruction." Elena felt the weight of cosmic responsibility settling on her shoulders like a mantle she had never asked to wear. "What exactly are you asking us to do?" "Awaken," Vorthak said simply. "Remember what your species was and choose what it will become. The neural capabilities that you demonstrated with the God Emperor's skull exist in approximately 12% of your current population. Those individuals can serve as bridges between your people and the transcended consciousness of the Eternal Fleet." "And if we refuse?" Morrison asked. Vorthak's expression became somber. "Then you will watch as the galaxy tears itself apart in the face of forces it cannot comprehend. The Council will fight to preserve their version of reality. Other ancient powers will awaken to reclaim what they believe belongs to them. And in the chaos that follows, billions of innocent beings will suffer." Elena looked around the command center at her crew. People she had served with, fought alongside, trusted with her life. They were looking to her for answers she didn't have and decisions she wasn't qualified to make. But sometimes, leadership meant acting without perfect information. "Keeper Vorthak," Elena said formally. "If humanity chooses to, awaken. What guarantees do we have that we won't lose what makes us human in the process?" "None," Vorthak replied honestly. "Transcendence is not about preserving what you are. It is about becoming what you have the potential to be. But consider this. Your species has already demonstrated the capacity for growth beyond your original limitations. You have traveled between stars, communicated with alien minds, adapted to environments that should have destroyed you. What you call humanity is not a fixed state. It is a process of becoming." Elena closed her eyes, thinking of the skull that had bowed to her, the neural patterns that suggested hidden capabilities, the historical evidence of suppressed contact incidents. When she opened them, she found herself looking at a decision that would affect not just her own species, but the entire galaxy. "What do you need from us?" she asked. Vorthak smiled, and for a moment, Elena could see traces of what he might have looked like before transcendence. Recognizably human, despite the cosmic awareness that now defined his existence. "Return to Earth, Captain Vasquez. Gather those among your people who carry the neural patterns necessary for awakening, and prepare humanity for a choice that will define the next phase of galactic evolution." The image of Keeper Vorthak began to fade, but his mental voice remained clear. "The Council will attempt to stop you. They believe they are preserving order, but they are actually preventing growth. Some of them may even resort to direct action against your homeworld, but remember, you are not alone. The Eternal Fleet watches, and we will intervene if necessary to protect the process of awakening." As the figure disappeared entirely, Elena found herself facing a command center full of people looking to her for leadership in a situation that no military academy had ever prepared them for. Outside their ship, alien vessels of incomprehensible power waited in the darkness, while throughout the galaxy, ancient forces stirred in response to humanity's return to cosmic awareness. Elena activated the ship's intercom system, knowing that her next words would begin a chain of events that could not be stopped.
This is Captain Vasquez. All department heads report to the command center immediately. We're going home, and we have work to do.
As her crew scrambled to comply, Elena stared out at the alien vessels surrounding them and wondered if she was leading humanity toward its destiny or its destruction. In the end, she realized, those might be the same thing. The journey back to Earth took 6 days that felt like 6 years. During that time, Elena watched her crew undergo changes that no human medical textbook could explain. Lieutenant Johnson, the engineering officer who had first noticed resonance in alien technology, began demonstrating an intuitive understanding of quantum mechanics that allowed him to optimize the ship's systems beyond theoretical limits. Ensign Martinez found herself translating alien languages she had never studied, as if the linguistic patterns were unlocking themselves in her mind. Most disturbing of all, Dr. Sarah Chen reported that the affected crew members' neural patterns were continuing to evolve, developing structures that seemed to bridge the gap between individual consciousness and something infinitely larger. Elena spent most of the return journey in her quarters poring over classified files that Admiral Harrison had transmitted before they lost communication with Earth Command. The files painted a picture of systematic deception that spanned over a century of human space exploration. Project Memoria, classified beyond top secret, had been documenting cases of human anomalous neural development since humanity's first ventures beyond the solar system. Deep space explorers who reported contact with unknown phenomena. Research scientists who began demonstrating impossible cognitive capabilities after exposure to alien artifacts. Colony administrators who claimed to receive guidance from sources they couldn't identify. In every case, the affected individuals had been quietly transferred to non-exploration duties and subjected to psychological evaluation that amounted to sophisticated mental conditioning designed to suppress their new capabilities. The official reason was always the same: protection of operational security and prevention of contamination-induced psychosis. But the truth, hidden in layers of encrypted data, was far more complex. Human intelligence agencies had known for decades that contact with certain alien technologies triggered dormant capabilities in some human minds. They had also known that these capabilities represented a potential threat to existing power structures, both within humanity and throughout the galaxy. Elena studied brain scans of affected individuals, noting the same neural resonance patterns that Dr. Jade Gould's Chen had identified in her own biology. The files suggested that approximately 12% of the human population carried the genetic markers that made them susceptible to awakening, but that this percentage was increasing with each generation. Most disturbing were the records of contact between human intelligence agencies and certain council species. The files suggested that humanity's introduction to galactic politics had been carefully orchestrated by alien factions who understood the potential threat that awakened humans represented. The goal had been to integrate humanity into existing galactic power structures before their dormant capabilities could manifest on a large scale. Elena was deep in these revelations when alarms throughout the ship announced their arrival in the Sol system. But when she reached the command center, she found Captain Morrison staring at tactical displays that showed a situation far more complex than a simple homecoming. "Report," Elena demanded, falling into her familiar position at the tactical station. Morrison gestured at the main display, his expression grim. "Elena, we're not alone out here. We've got Council fleet elements positioned throughout the outer system, human defensive formations near Earth, and something else that defies easy categorization." Elena studied the tactical situation, her trained mind automatically assessing threat levels and strategic positions. The Council forces were substantial. 3 full battle fleets positioned near Jupiter, Saturn, and Uranus respectively. Each fleet was composed of vessels from different species, suggesting a coordinated effort rather than a simple show of force. Earth's defensive formations were impressive by human standards but clearly outclassed by the alien vessels. The orbital defense platforms and mobile fleet elements that protected humanity's homeworld had been designed to deal with human enemies, not the advanced technologies of galactic civilization. But it was the third group of contacts that captured Elena's attention. Scattered throughout the asteroid belt and beyond were dozens of objects that registered on sensors as massive artificial structures but displayed energy signatures unlike anything in human or council databases. "Captain,
Dr. Chen's voice came over the intercom from the medical bay. You need to see this.
The crew members who have been experiencing neural changes are reporting sensory input that our instruments can't detect. They claim to be receiving detailed information about those unidentified objects.
Elena exchanged glances with Morrison, then made her way to the medical bay. She found Chen monitoring 3 crew members who were connected to neural activity scanners. Their brain patterns showed the same complex resonance that Elena had learned to recognize as a sign of awakening capabilities.
What are they telling you?
Elena asked.
Lieutenant Johnson looked up from his scanner, his eyes holding a depth of awareness that hadn't been there a week earlier. Captain, those structures in the asteroid belt aren't ships. They're nodes in some kind of communications network. We're receiving data streams that contain information about galactic history, technological specifications, and what appears to be tactical intelligence about the Council fleets.
Ensign Martinez nodded in agreement, her voice carrying harmonics that reminded Elena uncomfortably of Keeper Vorthak. The network is offering integration protocols, Captain.
It's showing us how to interface directly with systems that were built by the first human empire, but it's also warning us about immediate threats.
What kind of threats? Elena asked. The Council fleets aren't here for negotiation, Martinez replied.
Their orders are to prevent human awakening by any means necessary. If they detect large-scale neural evolution among our population, they're authorized to use weapons that will suppress our neurological development permanently.
Elena felt cold understanding settle in her stomach. They're planning to lobotomize our entire species. Dr. Pon. Chen looked up from her monitors, her face pale with the implications of what she was seeing.
Elena, it gets worse.
The neural suppressors they're planning to use aren't just temporary. According to the data streams our people are receiving, exposure to Council suppression technology would permanently alter human genetic structure.
We wouldn't just lose our current capabilities, we'd lose the potential for future evolution.
Elena returned to the command center with her mind racing through tactical possibilities.
The situation was clear. Humanity faced a choice between submission to alien control or a conflict that could result in the destruction of Earth's civilization.
But there was a third option, one that terrified her even as she began to understand its necessity. Captain Morrison, she said formally, I'm invoking my authority as ranking intelligence officer to assume tactical command of this situation. Morrison looked relieved, rather than offended.
Command is yours, Elena. What are your orders?
Elena activated the ship's communication systems, broadcasting on all frequencies used by the various forces surrounding Earth.
This is Captain Elena Vasquez of the human ship Meridian. I'm requesting immediate communication with fleet commanders from all factions currently operating in the Sol system. The response was immediate. Multiple communication channels opened simultaneously as human, alien, and unknown forces sought to establish contact. Elena found herself facing a holographic display that showed Admiral Harrison representing human forces, Council Commander Keth Vin speaking for the alien fleets, and a figure she recognized as Keeper Vorthak representing the mysterious structures throughout the system.
Commander Keth Vin, Elena began, addressing the Council leader directly. I've reviewed intelligence reports suggesting that your forces are here to implement neural suppression protocols against the human population. Is this accurate? The alien commander, a being whose crystalline structure marked him as a member of the Veltar species, replied with the formal tone of someone delivering an ultimatum.
Captain Vasquez, the Galactic Council has determined that humanity poses an existential threat to galactic stability. Recent developments have confirmed that your species carries dormant capabilities that could destabilize the current order.
We are authorized to take whatever measures are necessary to prevent this outcome. Elena nodded, having expected this response.
And Admiral Harrison, what are your orders regarding Council intervention in human space? Harrison's weathered face showed the strain of commanding forces against impossible odds. Captain, Earth Command's position is that we will not submit to involuntary genetic modification by alien forces, but our defensive capabilities are insufficient to prevent Council action if they choose to proceed with suppression protocols.
Elena turned to Keeper Vorthak. And the Eternal Fleet?
What is your position? We are observers unless forced to intervene, Vorthak replied. But Captain Vasquez, you have the capability to resolve this situation without large-scale conflict. The choice is yours to make. Elena took a deep breath, knowing that her next words would determine the future of human civilization. Commander Quethine, I propose a demonstration. You claim that human awakening represents a threat to galactic stability. I propose to show you what awakened humanity actually represents. The Council Commander's crystalline form flickered with what Elena had learned to recognize as agitation. Captain,
We will not permit large-scale awakening of your population. The risks are too great. Then let me awaken myself, Elena replied calmly. Full neurological integration with the capabilities that the Council fears. If I prove to be a threat, your forces can act accordingly. If I prove to be something else, then perhaps we can find an alternative to genocide. The silence that followed Elena's proposal stretched across the communication channels like a physical weight. She could see Harrison calculating the tactical implications, Kethwin consulting with unseen advisors, and Vorthak watching with the patient interest of someone who already knew the outcome. Captain Vasquez, Harrison said finally, you're talking about an irreversible change to your own neurology. We don't know what that process might do to you. With respect, Admiral, Elena replied. We don't know what any of our alternatives might do to humanity as a whole. This is the option with the smallest potential for collateral damage. Commander Kethwin spoke after another moment of consultation. Captain, if you proceed with voluntary awakening, my forces will monitor your neurological development. At any sign that you pose a threat to Council personnel or galactic stability, we will take immediate action. Elena looked at each of the faces on her display, then activated her personal communicator to address her crew. All hands, this is the captain. I'm about to attempt something that has never been tried under controlled conditions. Dr. Chen, I need you to monitor my neural patterns throughout the process. Everyone else, maintain your positions and be ready for anything. Elena moved to the center of the command center and closed her eyes, reaching out with her consciousness toward the data streams that Martinez and Johnson had been accessing. The initial contact felt like touching a live electrical wire with her mind, but she forced herself to maintain the connection as information flooded her awareness. The first revelation was the scope of the network she was accessing. The structures throughout the Sol system were indeed communication nodes, but they were part of a network that spanned the entire galaxy. Every star system, every planet that had ever been touched by the first human empire still contained dormant connection points that were awakening in response to humanity's return to awareness. The second revelation was the true nature of the threat that had motivated Council intervention. Awakened humans didn't just possess enhanced cognitive abilities or technological intuition. They possessed the capacity to interface directly with the fundamental forces that governed reality itself. Matter manipulation, energy projection, consciousness expansion beyond the limitations of individual biology. These were not science fiction concepts, but natural expressions of unlocked human potential. The third revelation was the most disturbing. The Council species weren't native to the galaxy. They were refugees from a conflict that had destroyed their original home, given sanctuary by the first human empire in exchange for their promise to serve as caretakers while humanity pursued transcendence. The current Council system represented a betrayal of that trust, a deliberate attempt to prevent their benefactors from returning to reclaim their inheritance. As Elena integrated this information, she felt her consciousness expanding beyond the confines of her individual identity. She became aware of every awakening human throughout the galaxy, every dormant node of the ancient network, every Council ship that surrounded Earth with weapons ready to fire. But most importantly, she became aware of the choices available to her in this moment. She could destroy the Council fleets with a thought, reaching out through the network to overload their power systems and leave them helpless. She could awaken every human in the galaxy simultaneously, creating an army of evolved beings capable of reclaiming their species' destiny. She could even reach beyond the galaxy itself, calling upon forces that made the current conflict seem insignificant. Instead, Elena chose understanding. Opening her eyes, she looked directly at Commander Kethwin and spoke with a voice that carried harmonics of absolute authority. Commander, your species has lived in fear of human return for 3,000 years. That fear has driven you to commit crimes against the very beings who once offered you sanctuary. But fear is not inevitable. Understanding is. Elena reached out with her expanded consciousness, not to attack or coerce, but to share. Through the network, she transmitted her own memories and experiences to every Council ship in the system. She showed them what it felt like to be human, the curiosity that drove exploration, the compassion that motivated sacrifice, the hope that enabled growth beyond apparent limitations. Most importantly, she showed them what awakened humanity could choose to be, not conquerors or destroyers, but partners in a galactic community that transcended the boundaries of species, world, and even physical existence. The effect was immediate and profound. Throughout the Council fleets, alien commanders found themselves experiencing memories and emotions that belonged to another species, but somehow felt familiar. They saw through Elena's eyes the wonder of discovering other forms of life, the grief of watching civilizations fall to violence, and the determination to build something better. Commander Kethwin's crystalline form was trembling when he spoke again. Captain, Eleanor, what you have shown us, it is not what we expected. We were told that awakened humans would seek dominion over lesser species. Instead, you offer partnership. Elena nodded, her consciousness now spanning multiple dimensions of reality, while still maintaining her essential humanity. The choice has always been yours to make, Commander. You can continue to live in fear of what we might become, or you can help us become something worthy of the gift your ancestors received. Keeper Vorthak stepped forward in his transmission, his expression showing approval mixed with deep satisfaction. Commander Kethvin, you now understand why the Eternal Fleet has waited for 3,000 years. Not for conquest or revenge, but for the possibility of genuine partnership between evolved and evolving consciousness. Admiral Harrison, who had been silent throughout Elena's demonstration, finally spoke. Captain Vasquez, are you still you? Elena smiled, feeling the warmth of connection to billions of awakening human minds across the galaxy while maintaining the individual perspective that made her Elena Vasquez.
I'm more myself than I've ever been, Admiral.
And I'm ready to help humanity become more than we've ever imagined possible. The standoff in the Sol system was over, but the real work was just beginning. Humanity had awakened to its true potential, the Council had been offered a chance at redemption, and the galaxy itself stood on the threshold of an evolutionary leap that would reshape the very nature of consciousness and civilization. Elena Vasquez, Captain, Intelligence Officer, and now bridge between what humanity had been and what it could become, stood ready to guide her species into a future that would honor both their ancient heritage and their limitless potential for growth. 6 months after the awakening, Elena Vasquez stood in what had once been the Grand Museum of the Eternal Dominion, now transformed into the Galactic Consciousness Institute. The Zefkari skull that had first recognized her presence no longer occupied a place of honor in a display case. Instead, it rested on a simple pedestal at the center of a chamber where representatives from dozens of species came to experience direct communion with the transcendent consciousness of the ancient empire. The galaxy had changed in ways that no one could have predicted. The immediate aftermath of humanity's awakening had been chaotic but not violent. As Elena's demonstration of expanded consciousness spread throughout human space, approximately 12% of humanity experienced spontaneous neurological evolution. Rather than the destructive rampage that Council forces had feared, the awakened humans became bridges of understanding between their own species and the broader galactic community. The transformations were profound but varied. Dr. Sarah Chen had developed the ability to perceive quantum probability streams, allowing her to predict the likely outcomes of complex political and social decisions. Lieutenant Johnson now interfaced directly with technology at a fundamental level, understanding the consciousness that existed within all sufficiently complex systems. Captain Morrison had awakened an empathic capability that allowed him to understand and mediate conflicts between radically different forms of consciousness. But perhaps the most significant change had come within the Council itself. Elena's transmission of human memories and perspectives had triggered an unexpected response among several alien species. The Veltar discovered that their crystalline forms could resonate with human neural patterns, creating hybrid consciousness networks that transcended the limitations of both species. The Brocklet found that their 6-armed forms were perfectly adapted to interface with the ancient network nodes that connected the galaxy, allowing them to serve as living communication hubs between distant civilizations. Even the mechanically augmented Corvex experienced unexpected evolution, as their cybernetic implants began developing characteristics that resembled organic consciousness, bridging the gap between artificial and natural intelligence. Elena walked through the Institute's corridors, observing the daily miracle of cooperation between beings that had been strangers or enemies just months before. In one chamber, human and Veltar researchers worked together to decode the mathematical principles underlying reality manipulation. In another, Corvex technicians collaborated with awakened humans to design vessels that could navigate not just through space but between dimensions. But it was in the central chamber, where the skull of God Emperor Nethyazoth held court, that the most profound work was being done. Elena entered the chamber to find Ambassador Fexmore in deep communion with the ancient artifact. The Veltar diplomat had become one of the most effective bridges between the old Council system and the emerging galactic consciousness. His crystalline form serving as a living translation matrix for concepts that existed beyond conventional language. Ambassador, Elena said softly, not wanting to interrupt his meditation. Thaxmore's harmonic voice carried new overtones as he responded without breaking his connection to the skull. Captain Vasquez. The God Emperor has been sharing memories of the first human empire. The similarities to current developments are illuminating. Elena approached the skull, feeling the familiar resonance as the ancient artifact acknowledged her presence. Over the past months, she had learned to interpret the complex communications that flowed through Zethkari technology. The skull wasn't just a repository of memories, it was a conscious entity that had chosen to serve as a bridge between the transcended Zethkari and the physical galaxy they had left behind. "What have you learned?" Elena asked, settling into the meditation posture that allowed for optimal interface with the artifact. The response came as a flood of images and concepts that bypassed conventional perception entirely. Elena saw the first human empire at its height, vast networks of awakened consciousness spanning millions of worlds, technology that was indistinguishable from magic, and a society based on the fundamental principle that all conscious beings possessed unlimited potential for growth. But she also saw the challenges that had ultimately led to humanity's choice of transcendence. As human consciousness expanded beyond physical limitations, maintaining connection to individual identity became increasingly difficult. Entire populations began merging into collective consciousness entities that, while more capable than their individual components, lost the diversity of perspective that drove continued evolution. The solution had been voluntary transcendence, the conversion of physical consciousness into pure information that could exist independently of biological constraints while maintaining individual identity. But this process required leaving behind the physical galaxy and all the unawakened beings who lived within it. They faced the same choice we're facing now, Elena realized, speaking the thought aloud as it formed: evolution beyond physical existence or finding a way to maintain individual identity while expanding consciousness. Fexmore's crystalline form brightened as he picked up the thread of Elena's insight. But we have advantages they did not possess. The diversity of consciousness forms represented by our current alliance provides stability that a single species cannot achieve alone. Human creativity, Veltar resonance, Corvex systematic processing, Brunklet multitasking. Each consciousness type contributes elements that the others cannot provide. Elena nodded, feeling the truth of this assessment through her connection to the expanded awareness network. The awakening process was continuing throughout the galaxy, but instead of following the pattern that had led to the first human empire's transcendence, it was creating something entirely new, a hybrid consciousness that maintained individual identity while sharing expanded capabilities.
Captain Vasquez, a new voice interrupted their meditation.
Elena looked up to see Keeper Vorthak materializing in the chamber, his transcended form manifesting through the Institute's dimensional interface systems. "Keeper," Elena acknowledged. "How goes the integration process?" Vorthak's expression showed satisfaction mixed with something that might have been surprise. "Better than the Eternal Fleet anticipated. We expected awakened humanity to follow the same evolutionary path as their predecessors. Instead, you have created something unprecedented. A stable hybrid consciousness that maintains individual identity while accessing collective capabilities." Eleanor stood, feeling the weight of galactic responsibility that had become her constant companion. "And what does the Eternal Fleet think of this development?" "We are intrigued," Vorthak admitted. "The transcended consciousness that comprises the Eternal Fleet chose to abandon physical existence because we believed it was the only path to unlimited growth. But your hybrid model suggests alternatives we had not considered." Dexmore rose from his meditation, his harmonic voice carrying excitement. "Keeper Vorthak, are you suggesting that the Eternal Fleet might consider returning to physical existence?" Vorthak was silent for a long moment before responding. "We are exploring possibilities that seemed impossible before the current awakening. But such decisions affect beings who have existed as pure consciousness for millennia. The process would be complex." Elena felt a sudden shift in the chamber's atmosphere as new presences made themselves known. Through her expanded awareness, she sensed the approach of entities whose consciousness signatures she had learned to recognize as representatives of the original Council leadership, those species whose fear of human return had nearly triggered galactic war. Commander Kethvin materialized in the chamber, accompanied by General Zexpoth and several other Council leaders. Their body language showed the mix of uncertainty and hope that had characterized interspecies relations since the awakening. "Captain Vasquez," Kethwin began formally, "the Council has reached a decision regarding the future of galactic governance. We request your participation in a ceremony that will formalize the transition from the old system to the new." Elena looked around the chamber at the assembled representatives of old and new consciousness. What kind of ceremony? General Zixup stepped forward, his mechanical components now seamlessly integrated with organic consciousness interfaces. A formal dissolution of the Galactic Council as a governing body, and the establishment of the Consciousness Collective as its successor, a system based not on political dominance, but on collaborative evolution. Elena felt the implications ripple through the awareness network as awakened beings throughout the galaxy responded to this announcement. The old system of hierarchical control was being replaced by something that had never been tried on a galactic scale: voluntary cooperation between equals. And what role would humanity play in this collective? Elena asked carefully. The same role as every other conscious species, Thexmore replied. Contributors to a shared effort to explore the boundaries of what consciousness can become. Keeper Vorthak nodded approvingly. The Eternal Fleet will support this development.
And perhaps, in time, we may find a way to contribute directly rather than merely observing from transcended distance.
Elena closed her eyes, reaching out through the network to touch the consciousness of awakened humans throughout the galaxy.
She felt their agreement, their excitement, their readiness to embrace a future that honored both their ancient heritage and their limitless potential. I accept, Elena said formally, on behalf of awakened humanity and as a representative of the continuing evolution of consciousness in this galaxy. The ceremony that followed was unlike anything in galactic history. In chambers throughout Council space, representatives of dozens of species joined their consciousness through the network that had awakened with humanity's return. Ancient artifacts came alive as conduits for communication between transcended and physical beings. Technology and consciousness merged in ways that created new forms of existence beyond the limitations of either alone. At the center of it all, in the chamber where a Zefkari skull had first acknowledged Elena's presence, the formal transition took place. The old symbols of authority, crowns, scepters, weapons of dominance, were replaced by simple network interface devices that allowed any consciousness to participate in galactic governance on an equal basis. Elena found herself holding one of these devices, a crystalline structure that resonated with the same frequencies as the Zefkari skull. As she activated it, she felt her individual consciousness expand to touch every awakened being in the galaxy while maintaining her essential identity as Elena Vasquez, human, captain, bridge between what had been and what could be. The last act of the ceremony was the most symbolic. The skull of God Emperor Nethyazoth, which had served as a symbol of absolute authority for 3,000 years, transformed itself one final time. The ancient bone structure dissolved into pure energy, then reformed as something new. A crystalline matrix that pulsed with the combined consciousness of everyone present. No more gods, Elena said, her voice carrying across multiple dimensions of reality. No more emperors. No more subjects. Only consciousness, growing, learning, becoming more than any individual could achieve alone. As the ceremony concluded and the participants began to disperse, Elena found herself alone in the chamber with the transformed artifact. The crystal that had once been a symbol of dominion now reflected the hopes and dreams of an entire galaxy learning to work together. Doctor, Sarah Chen entered the chamber, her consciousness bright with the quantum possibilities she had learned to perceive. Elena, the probability streams are showing something interesting. The awakening process isn't limited to our galaxy. The network is detecting responses from distant star clusters. Other galaxies where consciousness is beginning to stir. Elena smiled, feeling the vast scope of what they had begun to create. Then I suppose our work is just getting started. Outside the Institute, throughout the galaxy, awakened beings of dozens of species began the long process of learning to live and grow together. There would be challenges, conflicts, and failures along the way. Consciousness evolution was not a simple or painless process. But for the first time in galactic history, every species faced those challenges as equals, partners in an effort to discover what lay beyond the boundaries of their individual limitations. Elena Vasquez, who had begun this journey as a simple captain on a diplomatic mission, now served as one of many guides, helping consciousness itself learn to transcend the ancient patterns of dominance and submission. The galaxy had awakened to possibilities that seemed impossible just months before, and the greatest adventures were only just beginning. In the transformed chamber where gods and emperors had once demanded worship, a new song was being born, the harmony of consciousness learning to recognize itself in every form it took, reaching toward a future that would honor both individual identity and collective growth. The The skull no longer bowed to anyone because there was no longer anyone who required such submission. In its place stood equals, partners in the greatest experiment consciousness had ever undertaken, learning to grow together rather than apart, to create rather than dominate, to become more than the sum of their individual parts, while never losing what made each perspective unique and valuable. Humanity had returned to the galaxy not as conquerors, but as gardeners, helping consciousness itself bloom into forms that no single species could have imagined alone. The awakening was complete, but the real journey was just beginning.